We think of medicine in the traditional way that I think it's been believed, that it's there to help us either treat or prevent a disease. And the treatment of disease or the prevention of disease is a pretty downstream process, because by the time you have a disease, you're in need of something probably pretty significant to modify the disease. The question then is, where did it come from? What is its origin? And can we treat its cause rather than its effect? Because most of medicine is treating the effect, the symptoms, the pain, the disability, whatever the symptoms are. You've got different drugs that treat those different symptoms of that condition. But they all come from somewhere. What is the origin? As you're talking, I can't help but reflect on the fact that I've been told, this may not be true, but I've been told a number of times that I was the first podcaster. For 32 years, I never missed a month from 1972 through 2000, what was it? I guess it was 2010. I did a monthly audio newsletter for this. I started on celluloid tapes.
Yeah.
I then went to CDs eventually, and eventually went virtual on the internet. But I had, actually, it's where Steve Gundry learned about leaky gut. I interviewed him in the 90s and told him about leaky gut.
Wow.
So this whole emergence of this field is very exciting to see people like you who have really taken this and moved it to a whole different level than I kind of in the early days was kind of prospecting we didn't call it podcast back then. It was an audio magazine is what we called it back then.
So you used to obviously print the CDs and burn the CDs and then send them out?
And we transcribed every word. The woman who's worked with me for 25 years, Trish Yuri, transcribed every one of those because we didn't have auto transcription back then.
Yeah.
And it's very fascinating to me that she eventually put those on the internet, and occasionally I'll be searching something on the internet and it'll hit one of our episodes, and it will be that person I interviewed, because I interviewed most all of the kind of founding founding mothers of this field. When I started functional medicine as an institute in 1990, I'd already had 15 years experience with this field. So it's really kind of fun to look back.
Well, you're the OG, the original gangster, the godfather of functional medicine, right? I think when you look at today's world, I mean, what you've just shared is a lot of the foundational work that you might see in functional medicine today comes from your exercise and efforts from the 70s to the 90s. So by the way, I really appreciate what you were talking about, like burning the CDs and transcribing it and stuff, because it reminds me of the old days in my company where it was also very manual, right? And I still have those. In mine, it was binders, right? So for notes and for materials and physicals, it was binders, and I still have those binders, and I've never wanted to throw them away because they're like a classic sort of historical piece of Witz.
Exactly. Yeah.
So let's get into functional medicine, right? I mean, I think, and we'll get into your book as well, but let's just kind of keep going and we'll go. Let's just keep going. So functional medicine. I recently become obviously more invested and involved in functional medicine. Recently, I did something called stem cell treatment.
Sure.
Yeah, I did a plasma exchange treatment. Started meeting with a functional medicine doctor about a year ago and got all sort of the tests done and all that stuff. So it is quite amazing. And I could just imagine how hard it would have been back in the day to get sort of people bought into functional medicine, right? Kind of like personal development. So what was the uptake like back then? I mean, how did you find people receiving the whole concept of functional medicine?
Well, I think initially it was an uphill climb. I always said if I could have an education event in a phone booth, it would still have room for other people. So it started off with a pretty heavy uphill climb. The early adopters were individuals that were don't fence me in type personalities. They were people that were saying whatever I learned in school was not adequate to meet my needs. I'm looking for other explanations. I'm a little bit of a maverick, a heretic. I think out of the box, and that fit my personality very well. I actually my whole track has come kind of through that same kind of personality archetype. And over time, if you stick at it, as you know, and you stay your course, you'll find the target groups that are affiliated with your message. And fortunately, this message seemed to be sticky over time as more and more people got to understand it. And we finally formed the Institute for Functional Medicine in 1990. It now has 250,000 practitioners have gone through its courses. But that whole kind of evolution was one practitioner at a time. And I traveled over 6 million miles, talking to all sorts of people all over the world about this concept. So,
isn't it incredible that you've literally documented everything from the 70s? Like the legacy that's one day will be left is not a small one, but an extremely precise, detailed legacy. I mean, talk about the depth to that. So, congratulations, by the way. So let's break it down for the audience. So I was chatting with a friend the other day, and I'm like, functional medicine. And they said to me, what is functional medicine? And I was like, all right, well, how do I explain this? So how would we explain what is functional medicine, and how would you explain that?
Yeah, I think the simplest language I can think of is we think of medicine in the traditional way that I think it's been believed, that it's there to help us either treat or prevent a disease. And the treatment of disease or the prevention of disease is a pretty downstream process, because by the time you have a disease, you're in need of something probably pretty significant to modify the disease. The question then is, where did it come from? What is its origin? And can we treat its cause rather than its effect? Because most of medicine is treating the effect, the symptoms, the pain, the disability, whatever the symptoms are. You've got different drugs that treat those different symptoms of that condition. But they all come from somewhere. What is the origin? And that particular question has been on my mind, my mother says, since I was in grammar school. I've always been asking, why do people get sick? What is the nature of why they get sick? Why in elementary school, I used to wonder why, if there was a cold and flu season, that maybe half the class was absent, but the other half of the class who was exposed to the same thing were still in school and weren't sick. Why did some people get sick and others not? And so that concept was a fairly esoteric concept for many, many years, because we didn't have the explanation. When I was in medical school in the 60s, really, we didn't know the origin of where these conditions, heart disease, diabetes, dementia, Alzheimer's, any of these things came from. But over the years, fortunately, great advances have been made in understanding the mechanisms of origin of these. And the more you understand the origin, the more you understand the upstream effects. You understand the root cause. And so we got into the concept of saying, well, how do we then form a healthcare system that will treat the root cause rather than the downstream symptoms? Because if you treat the root cause, you won't have to worry about the symptoms. So that was the origin of functional medicine, to really start exploring seriously how you take the latest science, we call it systems biology, and translate it into approaches that a person would be treating upstream, or the root cause, that would then alleviate the cause of and not just the symptoms of their condition.
So you said something earlier, which is, really figuring out why people get sick. And I mean, do you have an answer to that, or maybe?
Yeah,
maybe
I have a very simple answer.
Yeah.
What is it? It's an answer that is simple to say and more difficult to fully understand. It's a combination of the genes that we're born. We get this book of life. It's encoded in 23 chapters. Half of the chapters written by our biological mother, the other half of the chapters by our biological father. It doesn't tell us how we're going to be, act, look, or behave, but it tells us the potential that we have in the course of living as to how we can fully express ourselves. And the translation of the genes into us is related to our lifestyle, our environment, our diet, the things that are modifiable. So the construct of why people get sick is the interface of their genes with their lifestyle, with their environment, with their diet. only one of which is modifiable, and that's the things that people do each day. You can't change your genes, but you can change the expression of how they're functioning.
So, what are some of the common things that disrupt the genes in our lifestyle?
Oh, great question. So that was the basis for the formation of Big Bold Health, because I recognized over the years, and actually over the decades, that there was one central place that all chronic diseases seem to reside, and that is in the immune system. And the immune system is doing 24/7, 365 surveillance, not just for viruses and bacteria, but it's really exploring where the body is healthy and where it's not healthy and where it's injured. So if you have a wound or an injury, your immune system jumps in to recycle the garbage from the dead and to create new. And so the immune system is an active part of your health program. It's actually the first level of defense you have, and rejuvenation of your health. So if in fact the immune system is a central upstream place where we can do something about it, the question is then, can we rejuvenate the immune system? Do we just take for granted that as we grow older, our immune system runs out of gas, we get more sick, we get inflammation, we get more infection? Or is the immune system a two-way street where you can take an old immune system and you can make it a younger immune system? That has become a central focus of my attention for the last 5 years. And that was what we formed Big Bold Health around. How do we rejuvenate? How do we turn back the biological clock on our immune system? And you can do that through specific lifestyle and dietary and health interventions.
All right, well, let's get into that, because that's the answer I want to know. So how do I oil change my my immune system? How do I replenish it, rejuvenate it, get it going again? Walk me through those steps, because I've got some bad habits, truthfully. Like, I mean, as much as I would like to describe myself as a healthy individual, I can get better at certain practices or certain lifestyle choices, let's say. And with that, I mean, what should I be super aware of doing more of, or maybe a little bit less of?
Well, first of all, Greg, I think we all have habits that we're working on all the time. So I have yet to meet anyone that's got this completely worked out at 100%. But it's the aspiration, right? It's the intention. It's I want to be the best I can be, but I also want to live life in the process. I'm not going to live out in some, rarefied environment, isolated from people, drinking distilled water and living on air. So how do we accomplish that? And I think that has really been the focus of many people's work. I'd like to include myself within that group. My focus on this goes back now nearly 50 years in my life. But the key, I think, is some basic principles, and they're not kind of remarkably revolutionary. There are things that people probably know intuitively, or we as a human species probably would not have survived to this point. So first of all, let's talk about eating. Eating is a shared common human experience. I've yet to meet someone that doesn't eat sometime. And so the question is, what are we eating? Now, we often think we're eating calories or we're eating nutrients. That's true. That's part of what we eat, but we're actually eating information. Our diet is information. Right. And it's information that actually is speaking to our genes. And it speaks to our genes both directly and indirectly through the way that food is processed by the living critters that live in our digestive tract called the microbiome. Because the microbiome participates in the digestion of our food, just like our digestive juices are doing that. And when the microbiome does its work inappropriately, what happens is we get bad information from our food that creates to our immune system a sense of alarm. And an alarmed immune system, you know what happens? It's called inflammation. And what are the diseases of today that have hallmarks? Every one of them are characterized by inflammation, whether it's dementia or it's diabetes or it's arthritis or it's skin problems or it's eczema, allergies. All of these are related to information your immune system is getting, and it's translating into those symptoms that you associate with inflammation. So how do you then make your immune system your friend and not your foe? And that's really sending the informations through your diet that are friendly information from your diet and not unfriendly. So what are unfriendly informations? I can just make a simple statement by saying ultra processed foods.
Right.
Ultra processed foods contain a variety of ingredients that by any stretch of discovery, of any scientific work you want to look at, enhance the immune system's feeling that there is some foreigner on board and you better jump out and try to defend yourself from it. That's inflammation.
Right.
So what we see with ultra processed foods, that's high sugar, high processed fats, low fiber, depleted carbohydrates, and ultra processed flours. That leads ultimately into a situation that we see in our society of immunological problems. Like, why did the United States suffer such severe infection with SARS-CoV-2 and we thought we were so healthy, yet we had the worst outcome of any developed country in the world? Because our immune systems are really not very good. And we needed to be much more on an immune repair program, rejuvenation program. So what kind of foods, if ultra processed foods are on the bad side of the curve, what's on the good side of the curve? Well, I would say simply things that lived in the soil at one time that are minimally processed. So these would be things like natural fruits and vegetables, whole grains, things that look like they were alive at one time. It could also be lean cuts of meat, not genetically hybridized, overly medicated animals. And when we start using those simple principles and ask the question, well, how does our immune system respond to the consumption of those foods? What we find is we have a much happier immune system. It says, I'm at peace. I don't need to be uptight and doing battle and producing the messages of inflammation. So the first step really is to look at a person's diet and ask, are they eating friendly foods? Are they eating foods that are guaranteed to get your immune system aroused because they are not seen as friendly? They're seen as unfriendly. That information that's coming from food is activating your immune defense because your immune system is doing what it's supposed to do. It's protecting you from something it thinks is a hazard, from injury. Mm-hmm. So that would be number one. Number two is psychobiologically, how do you set the message? If your food is sending a good message to your immune system, what about your psychobiology? How about how you look about yourself and think about yourself and act in the world? So we can send toxic thoughts to our immune system. This is when we're in distress. This is post-traumatic stress syndrome. This is related to a whole series of feeling unworthy, feeling unloved, unsupported, where you're adrift in the world, like jumping out of a plane without a parachute and trying to figure out on the way down how you're going to proceed. And those things send messages to your genes. Just as the foods can cause injury, so can toxic thoughts and toxic relationships. And there are biological mechanisms. I could go into great detail, probably bore you to tears, with the mechanisms that are now well understood that do that. Well, how does your brain clear itself of those kinds of things? Because we all have bad experiences. There's no such thing as like the perfect life. So how does our body clear those things and does so by one of the most important components of our daily routine for a body kind of repair, which is called sleep. Mm-hmm. And when we're not sleeping or not sleeping either efficiently or long enough, we don't have the optimal ability to clear this information that could disturb our immune system and create things like nervous arousal, like elevated blood pressure, like foggy brain, like depression. Those can all come as a consequence of your body's information that the brain is receiving is one of alarm. And when we have alarm and it's not able to be detoxified, it builds up and it creates these problems of psychological disturbance. So the plan obviously then is you got to sleep well.
Right.
You've got to take rest. You've got to find experiences in your life to celebrate the joy of living. It could be art, it could be poetry, it could be music, it could be a walk in the park, it could be nature, it could be planting a garden. It could be so many different things that connect yourself to the process of your immune system feeling happy and friendly in a safe place. Then the third example is what happens if you happen to live downstream from the uh, outfall from a toxic industry, or you live right next to a freeway, or you're in an environment where you're constantly exposed to funny molecules that the human body never thought it was going to be seeing, because we have over 50,000 new chemicals that have been put into the environment over the last few decades. And so your body then can only accept so much of that information. That information your immune system is first to pick up. It's called immunotoxicology. And your immune system is a very sensitive indicator, as your nervous system is. Neurotoxicology and immunotoxicology are woven together. So if you want to get that information off the board, then you've got to find ways of getting away from the source of toxins like lead in the water or things of that nature. But you also need to enhance your body's detoxification process, because the body does have the ability to convert and eliminate through either the urine or the feces or sweat toxins. And so the next thing that we talk about is making sure that you've got the bad information from your environment regulated, the things that are toxic insults. That then gives your immune system a breath of fresh air, so to speak, and makes it smile. All these things together then create a portfolio of activities that when you apply them in the individual selects to apply them in their lives, can turn health around. And I can see this in thousands of people. I'm very fortunate. I made a decision early in my career. I was going to go out of the medical school environment and go into the PhD environment so I could do these kinds of research studies. And I've been amazed over the decades of how many people have come up to me and said, literally, you saved my life. I never did surgery. I never prescribed a drug. All I did was give information like we're talking about here about how a person self-regulates using the tools that we natively have available to us, but often are missed because they're not discussed generally when you go to your doctor. And so this construct that you can be in charge of your immune system, you can be the master of your immune system rather than being the victim of your immune system, is not specious. It's not superfluous. It is real. And I have seen it in thousands and thousands of people over the years who have turned their health around. So it really works.
Wow. It's probably the best explanation I've ever heard around functional medicine. Brilliant. And so simple. So, I want to go back to the detoxifying exercise. So, the environment, being able to sweat and urine and feces and remove those toxins. As you're saying, sweating, I was thinking about people that do saunas and, infrared saunas and stuff. And you see things like cold plunges right now. So what are your thoughts on that? And in quotations, does it actually work? Is it actually contributing to that immune system being regenerated, boosted again?
Yes. In fact, there
Things
are.
like that.
Yeah, no, I think that's an extraordinarily important point that you're making. I was very, very intrigued. I'm going back now in my history to the 80s. I was doing a series of studies out of LA County in Los Angeles. And I had a fire chief come up to me and he said, Jeff, we've had some really serious issues with our fire crews being exposed to this big fire that was in downtown Los Angeles. And these firefighters have really not gotten well. It's a little bit like what happened after 9/11 with a lot of the people in New York City. They've just not felt well. And do you think if we put them on a program, it could improve them? And I said, well, I think so. But if we're going to do this, we ought to do it in a formal way so we could quantify the results and maybe publish the results if this was a positive outcome. Well, that work went over the next 15 months, and we followed several hundred different firefighters that had been exposed. And they started off really fairly seriously disabled, particularly in terms of their stress, in terms of their emotions, in terms of their memory, cognitive function. Their energy was low. Their sleep patterns were very bad, the interruption. At the end of the program, we had something like I think it was a 67% improvement in symptoms in the 15 months by putting them through, a comprehensive program that just employed the three principles that I just discussed. And we published that. That became then kind of a starting point for many clinics around the United States to start saying, well, maybe we ought to be more involved with detoxification. Maybe there are many other places. After 9/11, that became a very big part of a lot of the doctors in New York City with how they were managing people that were suffering from the exposures from 9/11. So this construct that our body has the ability to heal and repair, and it can get rid of toxins, is real. I mean, we have a series of genes in our genome whose selective and singular purpose is to detoxify things and to work on how to take foreign nasty molecules and convert them into things that we can get rid of so we don't store them. And I think that these concepts that reside in our body, I mean, if you think about the human species over the years, we were exposed to all sorts of things. Yeah. And if we didn't have a way of getting rid of those Krakatoa volcanic eruptions and spoiled food because we didn't have refrigerators and all sorts of things, we would have never made it to this point. So we have these extraordinary adroit systems, but they need to be supported. And they're not supported by bad diets and poor lifestyles and too much alcohol and not enough rest. They depreciate and degrade, and they don't do the work for us.
This is amazing. And detoxifying in all three areas, I mean, makes total sense. I just wanted to get a little more specific about the food side of things, right? So look, thoughts kind of easy, right? Like that's around sort of mindset. It rest, your body needs to reset and restore. Sleep for me actually has been one of the easiest things over the last few years. I'm disciplined about it. I go to bed early and I wake up early and I get my sort of, 9 hours on average. And it is restful sleep, very restful sleep. But what about food? So yes, it's about eating well and stuff. And when I first went to the functional medicine doctor, just to give you some context, I came out with my labs and had all my sort of, tests and peptides and everything going. And he was like, great, here is a range of, supplements that you need, right? I can't even tell you what the names were, but it's 10 pills a day. How does that affect? Like from a supplement standpoint, is it adding in to be bringing up these vitamin levels and levels up to where they need to be, which then in turn is helping my immune system? And here's the basic question. Do I really need to take all the supplements, or can I just sort of focus on the food?
Well, you have a lot of stuff in those questions there. So let me.
I know. I went kind of all over the place. So
it's good. It's good. So let's start with the basic principle, and that is food. As I said, food is information. Everyone has to eat. And so if we eat the wrong information, even taking supplements, it's hard to neutralize the effects of bad food. Right. So what kind of food? So one of the things that we discovered, when I say we, that's a collective we, it's a large group of people, was that there are certain foods that we have in our diets that actually specifically participate in the support of our detoxification process. Now, to make this a little bit more specific, these foods are members of the what's called cruciferous vegetable family. Now, who are those? Those are broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, cabbage. That family, you know them as smelly vegetables, basically, when they're cooked. And they contain a series of unique plant nutrients that are called glucosinolates. And when they're consumed in the diet, our digestive process breaks them down into a series of secondary materials, secondary molecules, that have specific influence on activating the genes in our cells, particularly in the liver, that encourage the detoxification of foreign substances. Now, that may sound like coevolution, that somehow a plant evolved to have these chemicals in it that when we eat, then helps us to get rid of chemicals. That's a really interesting story. We won't go into the philosophy of coevolution, but let's just suffice to say, yes,
makes sense.
If you have more broccoli, if you have more Brussels sprouts, if you have more cabbage, you'll be supporting then your body's detoxification process. Now you're going to say, okay, well that seems reasonable. I will trust your science is not way off the map here, but I really don't like to eat every meal. I don't like cruciferous vegetables that much. So can I take a supplement to fill the gap? And the answer is yes. There are all sorts of these cruciferous vegetable concentrate supplements, indole-3 carbinol, sulforaphane from Brussels sprouts. These are supplements that contain these bioactive ingredients that are found in these foods, that if you supplement with them, you will get the advantage that has been seen from those studies on those foods. So is it food or is it supplements? Well, no, they're connected together. We have to know what we're trying to do and then pattern our lifestyle appropriately. If you're eating the perfect diet.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. Perfect diet. Do I do the supplements as well, considering that my vitamin levels and peptides are all going to be sort of a little bit different, and I do want to get them to a sort of prime level?
Yeah, and I would say that this depends a little bit on the degree of the state of health that you're in when you start. If you, it's like a bank account. If you've been drawing from your bank account for a long time, your reserve is low. You need to build that reserve up. You may need to augment your good diet with supplemental nutrients. If you've been eating very well, living a great lifestyle, you're on top of your health, then your diet probably will give you what you need. But most people are not in that situation.
Yeah.
Well, the diet plus the supplements together forms the right package.
Yeah. And that's what you were talking about within the US with, COVID, which was like the results and the effect. And when you look at the North American diet, it is, that's the joke between, when you go to the US or even Canada and you open a fridge versus when you go to Italy and you open a fridge. What are the differences that you see? In North America, we see a lot of boxes in the fridge, right? A lot of like different yellow boxes, red boxes, blue boxes, beige boxes, right? Your food is beige. Everything's beige. And when you go to an Italian fridge or European, you open the fridge, you see fresh red vegetables, fresh green vegetables, and a little bit of it, right? Just a little bit, just enough to make maybe one meal before it's all gone. And then we got to go back to the market again and get the fresh food. I got to tell you, so I live in Costa Rica now. I've been here for about 2.5 years. And, back to the environment, I was living in Toronto before. But environment, food, activity, people, happiness, like everything you've listed off have been key differences in our lifestyle or where we live right now. And when I look at myself and my kids and my wife, like day and night, like polar opposites. Like it's funny, I see a picture. There was a picture taken of like me and my wife and my kids and other family members, probably about 2 months before we actually came down for the first time. And the plan was not to stay here. The plan was to come for a couple of months and then go back. We look like different people. Mainly being we're all like out of shape and we're unhealthy and it's no good. And you see pictures of us now, it's like again day and night. So really interesting. I also wanted to ask you, so we hit food, we hit environment, we hit thought. Yes, okay, genetics. So as I was sharing with you earlier, in my family history, there's been a history of gastronomic issues. So my grandfather died from stomach cancer. My father passed from rectal cancer. My uncles had colon cancer, pancreatic cancer, eventually ended up passing. And that's the history that we know. And I get screened every year and I have polyps removed every year. And it's like, I've done everything over the years, the changing of lifestyle, the changing of diets. And even today, I'm very healthy, but I still get screened every year. We look at my brother, right? He's like, no issues. My sister, Crohn's disease. So how does now having this sort of genetic blueprint in your history, how can that be affected by functional medicine, all these things? Or very direct question, can we affect it?
Oh, that's really a superb question. And that is the discovery and the aha of our age, what you just said, the major discovery that changes the whole landscape. So now let me go into it. Mm-hmm. So I want to run into this. I'm going to answer your question, but give me just a little runway.
Yeah, go for it.
So years ago, I had the opportunity to meet Dan Buettner, who is the author of the book Blue Zones and had done the study on populations that have long lives, including Costa Rica, by the way.
Yep. I'm about an hour from Nicoya, so that's the Blue Zone here.
Okay. So Dan and I have talked over the years about his observations. He has this new Netflix special on the
You know,
blue zones. It's really
you know,
good.
yeah.
And so one of the things that you find when you look at his work is that there are many variables that are associated with people who live long, healthy lives. The way they interact with one another, the way they socialize, the way they eat, the things like you were talking about with natural living. But there are also certain foods that they consume that are very high in a family of nutrients that are now starting to gain popularity called polyphenols. Polyphenols. Now, how do we characterize polyphenols? We characterize them by these are foods that represent the rainbow. They can be orange, red, blue, um, yellow. So they're obviously vegetable-related products and fruit-related products. These polyphenols have been found over the last several years to have an incredibly important role in modulating our immune function and our ultimate health, inflammation, and all these kind of chronic conditions that people get through a process that's only recently been discovered. And this is actually the foundation of Big Bold Health. This is why we formed our company, was around this discovery. Because these polyphenols actually have been discovered in basic science just within the last less than a decade to modulate how our genes are expressed through a process that's called epigenetics. Epi meaning above the genes. So we can't change the genes, but we can change how the genes are sending their message to the body. And that's done by the process of epigenetics, which means certain messages were tagged on the genes telling what portions of our book of life can be read and what portions of our book of life were expurgated. It was like you had sticky notes saying read here or paper clips saying unavailable. Those epigenetic messages are in part regulated by the polyphenols and the flavonoids, these colored materials from eating the rainbow that are in our diet. And every one of the countries that has a long history of being a member of the blue zone community are people that eat diets that are very high in these polyphenols. Some on average about 10 times higher than the average American consumes on a daily basis. So when we started to look at this with basic science in our facilities, is that we found that we could actually measure how our immune cells, the genes in our immune cells, were being influenced by the polyphenols in our diet to change the structure and function of our immune system. So if we had people eating foods that kind of had commerce, their immune system would be tagged in such a way that it would activate their inflammation tendency. If they eat a diet that was high in these polyphenols, we found that it tagged their immune system cells in such a way to be at rest, to be quiet, to be balanced. Now, where are these polyphenols found? I mentioned in fruits and vegetables that have color, but we happened on, this was a fortuitous kind of discovery, we happened onto a food that is 4,000 years old that got lost in the Western world some 200 years ago as a food that has the highest level of these immune related activities. And it's called Himalayan Tartary buckwheat. Now, buckwheat is not a wheat. So let me just dispel I don't even know how that got its name as a wheat, but it's not a wheat, not even related genetically at all to wheat. But the Tartary stands for the Tartan district of China. It's the northern, up against the Himalayan mountains. So Himalayan Tartary buckwheat is a 4,000-year-old food that is eaten by people in the blue zones in that area that is extraordinarily rich. In fact, when I say extraordinarily, it's about 50 to 100 times higher in immune strengthening nutrients than common buckwheat, the buckwheat we think of every day. This Tartary buckwheat, it turns out, has been studied, in quote, for thousands of years. It's in the Yellow Emperor's Handbook of Therapeutic Agents going back 2,000 years. It is part of traditional Chinese medicine therapy. Tartary buckwheat tea is known as a health promoting product. So we got very interested in what's in there and how does it work and how does it influence the immune system. I got so interested that, believe it or not, I eventually then put together a Tartary buckwheat growing cooperative in upstate New York with farmers. We now own farms. We now have a Tartary buckwheat mill, and we are trying to bring this back into the United States as a immune active food. It was actually a food that was eaten by our colonial ancestors coming into the United States. It was brought over from Europe, from China, because it's so hardy. It doesn't need fertilizer. It doesn't need pesticides or herbicides because it's so high on these phytochemicals. Bugs don't like it. So it was a really great food for our ancestors that allowed them to survive. It got lost, I believe, about 200 years ago, probably because it was didn't produce as much yield as wheat, soy, and corn. And so people then just pushed buckwheat, Tartary buckwheat aside. It also has its own flavor profile. So we have chefs now working with us. We have nutritionists working with us. We have whole cookbooks. We have recipe guides. We're growing it. We're producing it. We have a whole range now of immune-related Tartary buckwheat products. And it's really been a kind of an exciting chapter to relearn what historically these cultures have known that have been part of the blue zones for generations.
I should introduce you to one of my clients. They're a global, not food manufacturer. They do food sciences, for lack of a better term. But they're always looking for new, innovative ingredients to use. And they were very early adopters of cricket powder.
Oh, yeah.
And they do a ton of research. I think you guys would get along. Anyway, we'll follow up with that conversation afterwards, but I think it'd be a good connection for you. So this buckwheat, are you selling it in what, like bag form? Is it going to be a supplement that one takes? A little bit of both?
Yeah, we recognize that not everybody makes their own meals. And so we have flour. We have Himalayan organic certified Himalayan Tartary buckwheat flour. We're the only producers in the United States of that product. We also have it in capsule form called HTB Rejuvenate. We have it in shake mix called HTB Superfood. You can all find this on our website, which is bigboldhealth.com.
Cool.
But we also just recently, in fact, when I say recently, last month, released something that I am really excited about, because in working with us over the last several years and taking a number of trips to Asia and talking to experts that do a lot of research on Tartary buckwheat there, we found that if you sprout the Tartary buckwheat seeds in a very special way, that you can quadruple the level of these immune active substances. This becomes a superfood.
Wow.
And it's the highest level of these immune active components of any food that I'm aware of. So we have now just started to produce, as of last month, a Himalayan Tartary buckwheat sprout powder that can be put in anything. It doesn't have to be cooked. You can put it in a smoothie. You can put it in salad dressing. You can put it in soups. You can just use it wherever. And it's so powerful that 2 teaspoons of that sprout powder are equivalent to a half a cup of the flour in terms of immune reactive capability.
Wow, it's amazing, and how we evolve, right, in our ideas and in the success of these products. So I right after this, I'm hopping on the website. I'm going to get a big supply of stuff because it's going to go into my smoothie as well. I'll be a case study for you as well. How's that?
I'd love it. All
right, we'll see if my back gets better. So what about and this might sound like a silly question, but what about Himalayan salt? Like if it's
Himalayan salt is interesting because it has certain minerals other than sodium chloride in it. That's one of the reasons it's pink, because it has these other trace amounts of other minerals. So if we think that our mineral nutrition is important for our body's function beyond sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium, which I do, that includes chromium and it includes cobalt, and it includes vanadium, and it includes a whole portfolio of micro elements that Himalayan salt, has these other components within it. Plus, the pink color comes from some residual materials that are related to these phytochemicals that I've described.
Yeah. So that's a mineral additive, like that's going to help on the mineral side. But the The flour, the powder, the superfood that you talk about is really going to help contribute to really boosting my immune. And boosting is the wrong word. It's replenishing and rebuilding our immune system, right? And inflammation is it. I'll share this. So I was talking about stem cells earlier with you, right? Which I got stem cells done for my back. I was laid out. I could barely move this year. It was extremely difficult. And one of the first things that happened was my back, which was incredibly inflamed, instantly went down. And of course, there's a process after that. It takes time for them to adhere, and you guys still got to go through some physical therapy and stuff like that. But the trick was what was getting inflammation down. Any thoughts on stem cells? And I know it's sort of more new and it is floating in the world of
think
functional medicine.
I think stem cells have come a long way in the technology over the last several years. I think that a lot of the technology that could make it more readily available, so it wasn't just a research technique, it was actually clinically applicable, has been achieved. And I personally have seen many of, I'm in that age group now where a lot of us are reminding ourselves that we had a lot of years of doing stuff that was injurious to our joints.
Right.
And so a lot of my colleagues and friends are getting stem cell therapy and having a quite good response from it. So I think that there's a lot to be said. And I think we're learning more and more about the technology as we get more experience. So I think it's part of regenerative medicine. It's very important.
Exactly. Regenerative medicine. Exactly. All right, Jeff, we're coming to the top of the hour, man. I can't believe this conversation's flying by. I would love to have a follow-up with you in the new year as well. We could have part 2 if you're up for it, and we can keep the conversation.
I love it, Greg. This has been so much fun, and you're right. The time has really flown by. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world right now, and we need to harness the good stuff because there's a lot of other not as good stuff flowing in the world. So we need the good stuff to flow in the right direction.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more, and well said. And I think, coming on Big Bold Health and you and sharing some more insight around functional medicine and getting healthy, and maybe even getting more specific around some of the products and what they do, and really giving people this information, because this is what the point is, right? I think we're overwhelmed and inundated with information. It's like, who do I listen to? One person's telling me to eat organs. The other one's telling me to water fast. This one's telling me to do stem cells. The other one's telling me to do breath work. Who do I listen to? And it's not that any of these things are wrong and stuff, but, it is about distilling the stuff down where there is effective research in regard to functional medicine and regenerating or enhancing our immune system. And then there's just a lot of other things which are nice practices that add to our lifestyle. And I love the way you broke it down in those 3 areas, which is food and thoughts, I'm just paraphrasing, and then your physical environment. And the exercise with all of this with food is really getting that right information into, so it can speak to your genes and it can have effective communication. That's what I was talking about with you before, right? That's what I do for a living. We do it with people, and you do it with genes, and people having that insight. And then obviously really the importance of that sort of, that thought, that mindset, the things that allow us to rest, to rebuild. And then of course, how do we now start to detoxify from some of our environment, which is very cool. How could people get in touch with you if people wanted to order some of your products? Drop the website again. If they wanted to follow you more on LinkedIn and Instagram, where could people pick up your book? Give us all the information.
Yeah, thank you very much. So all this information I was talking about as it relates to the immune system is Big Bold Health, and that's www.bigboldhealth.com. Very simple. Anybody that wants to kind of see what I've been doing over the last 40 plus years, you can go to jeffreybland.com. That's JEFFREYBLAND.com. We have literally hundreds of videos and all sorts of educational materials. The last area where I've been very excited to see what's going on. We put together an educational institute now 12 years ago called the Personalized Lifestyle Medicine Institute, and we host a whole variety of educational programs with thought leaders around the world in these different areas. And people can go to that website and download our recorded videos of thought leaders that are Nobel Prize winners and others. And that's plminstitute.org. So those are the three places you can find what I'm up to.
Amazing. And we're going to drop all of those links in the show notes. So for the audience, if you didn't get to write it down, don't worry, go and click it, and you could just copy or click it from the player or the platform that you're on. Jeff Bland, you are a true gentleman and scholar. The definition of being a better human. At the end of the episode, we asked the better human question, which is, what do you think we could all do to be a better human tomorrow? But I'm going to change that for you, because this is around health and building our immune systems. So, what do you think we could all do to have better health as of tomorrow?
I think it's actually very simple. It's recognizing that we're deserving of good health and that we can be in charge of it. We're not a victim. We're the orchestrator, and we need to take charge and to validate our value in the world, because every human being has value.
That was one of the best answers this year, man. That's awesome. All right. To the audience, if you like today's episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, share. Of course, go and connect with Big Bold Health. Go check out the website. If you like the products, go and sort of order some. Jeffrey Bland is also someone that you could find on social media, and a true contributor to the world of functional medicine. I feel blessed and honored for having this conversation, Jeff. Thank you so much.
I feel the same way, Greg. Thank you.